Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with the Trinity Crisis, Dark Knight's Metal, or really Death Metal. We're back with Trinity Crisis, right? And here's the thing. I've been telling you guys this entire time, this is one of these stories you guys need to go out and buy, right? Like Death Metal, Dark Knight's Metal, like this is one of those that you just absolutely have to own. So I do the Q&A sessions every Friday at 6:30 p.m. on twitch.tv/comicsexplained, right? 6:30 p.m. Eastern. And somebody asked the question, if DC Comics has their multiverse, and within their multiverse is the antimatter universe, where the Anti-Monitor resides, then it stands to reason that with that being the positive multiverse, and there being a, dark multiverse, that the dark multiverse would have its own version of the antimatter universe and a dark multiverse Anti-Monitor. And my initial thought was, no, I don't think so, right? I mean, because it, I guess it's possible, but it never really occurred to me. This story answers that, and there is. There's a dark multiverse version of the Anti-Monitor, which is amazing, right? So what this does is it initially gives us kind of this little bit of an introduction to crises, right? The way that the crises events worked in the history of DC Comics. For those of you guys who don't know what that means, DC has always kind of launched these crisis events as a way to kind of reboot their landscape. The last time DC did a hard reboot with a crisis was during the original Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now before that, you even had things like Crisis on Earth 1 and Crisis on Earth 2, but Crisis on Infinite Earths and then Infinite Crisis and Final Crisis are like the big three. From there, you have like 0 Hour Crisis in Time, stuff like that. But the idea was that the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths basically eliminated the multiverse, but it left some continuity errors in terms of the characters who existed. 0 Hour sought to correct some of those continuity errors and didn't do it that well. And then you go into Infinite Crisis, which served the purpose of bringing back the multiverse, even though the superheroes didn't know about it, as well as making even more changes to the continuity after the original Crisis. And then Final Crisis made the heroes aware of the multiverse's return, and then added in some more continuity corrections, right? As well, things like bringing back Barry Allen, stuff like that. But that's basically how the crisis events worked over the course of DC's comics. The idea here is that what's going on now is in effect a crisis, right? That's basically what this is. DC hasn't really advertised it as one, but Scott Snyder is like, it's essentially a crisis, right? A crisis is an event whereby everything could come to an end and then in some form or fashion be remade in a way that would basically suck. And so the idea of the superheroes is to stop that event from happening. That's basically what this is. And so with that being the case, historically speaking, the various superheroes have usually fought together in the face of these crisis events. But what Wonder Woman is pitching here is what we saw in the last video that we did, where it's basically creating strike teams. And the team of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman are going to infiltrate Castle Bat. That within Castle Bat is access to the three major crises that have happened in DC's history. The original Crisis on Infinite Earths, the original Infinite Crisis, and the original Final Crisis. The difference here is that while they are these original crisis events, they're the dark multiverse versions, right? So the dark multiverse version of Anti-Monitor and Superboy Prime and Darkseid are awaiting in those particular worlds. Not only that, those are worlds where the crises are constantly happening, right? So it seemed like they basically never ended. Now, what we also saw in the last video is exactly what we're getting here, in the sense that Jarro, who's the most powerful psychic in the entirety of the DC universe, is going to be the one to basically help guide them back, right? He's going to get them in there, and then when it's time for them to get out of those worlds, be their anchor point that will yank them right out of there, right? And bring them back to Castle Bat and allow them to get back to safety, to the positive multiverse and to the positive DC universe itself, and then basically save the day. The other cool thing here, this is kind of funny, is that a psychic amplifier is created by Mr. Miracle to help Jarro through his whole process, and it's in the shape of a jar. And he's kind of pissed because he hated being stuck in a jar. But the other funny thing too is kind of like the sort of back and forth between Jonah Hex and Jarro, right? This is kind of, if I'm being honest, I feel like this is going to end up being like the unsung hero of this story. Jonah Hex just starts giving him crap. He's like, hey, like no offense, to the starfish there, but can you really block that many minds? And the idea is that Jarro he can block the minds of almost anybody within his immediate vicinity, right? That's kind of how the psychic energy works. He can't do it across the entire universe. He can't shield everybody's mind from everything out there. But for the strike team that's going in there, for Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman, he can basically pull it off. And so with that being the case, again, the plan kind of gets reiterated. That Martian Manhunter and Hawkgirl are going to take a team and they're going to destroy Perpetua's throne so they can basically reroute the energy to Wally when the time comes, right? Because remember, Wally West is running from the Batman Who Laughs, and Wally West contains, or at least has, the last bit of Dr. Manhattan's power that the Batman Who Laughs needs in order to overpower Perpetua. And so the idea is to basically take Perpetua's throne from her so that when the time time comes that Wally West passes through, they can literally take the energy that's been accumulated so far and the energy from Perpetua and pass it to Wally West, and then seemingly give Wally the power to destroy the Batman Who Laughs. That kind of seems to be the case. At the same time, John Stewart and the various lanterns are going to take out the different antennae that are remaining throughout the various dark multiversal Earths, right, where Perpetua is absorbing that energy from, is basically what it is. Think of the antenna as like straws, and she's drinking these dark multiverse worlds, the energy that comes off of them. It's the easiest way to think of it. But the idea here is that once these boxes are created, right, these teleportation boxes are made, then you basically have Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman who teleport to Castle Bat. Now, if I'm being honest with you guys, I do love Scott Snyder. Scott Snyder's probably one of the best writers running in DC Comics right now. Scott Snyder, man, I feel like we have some missed opportunity here. You've got Warbat here, who basically looks like Mongol, the villain Mongol, if he became Batman or in some form or fashion was tied into Batman. You've got the Grim Knight who returns. He was a great character. I love what Snyder did with him. You've got Bat Mazo. So basically, like if Batman had the powers of a Mazo, and then you've got Mindhunter, right? If Batman had the powers of Martian Manhunter. This is kind of some missed opportunity, man. Like these are the kind of one-shots people want to see, right? Like origins. Like how did Batman become a Mazo? How did Batman get the power of Martian Manhunter? How did Batman get the power of Mongol? Like how did these things kind of coalesce and come together? Like that's kind of the funny thing. That's what's so interesting about the death metal run and everything that's been happening, even with Dark Knight's metal, is there could have been dozens and dozens and dozens of one-shot stories on these different Batman, right? Like I would argue DC probably could have gotten away with about 30 to 35 one-shots before people got tired of it, before people were like, okay, I don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. I think they probably could have gotten away with that. You know, maybe 30 or 35 is a little high, possibly 20, maybe 25, but certainly like a year's worth of one-shots, you know, just literally just release them like every 2 weeks over the course of a year. And it's just all of these different versions of Batman. The issue is that if you don't really see them anymore, what's the point of it? If they appear once, of what's the use of that one shot? But it is a cool story and it's easy money. But once they arrive here on this world, the biggest issue they have to contend with is how they get past this veritable army of different Batmen who are occupying the main entrance to Castle Bat. And it's kind of cool because remember, they have Swamp Thing on their side. And one of the things that Swamp Thing hits at here is that on this world, most of the plant life has been burnt. And here's a question I actually want to ask you guys. Sidetrack for a second. Here's a question I want to ask you guys. Should we record or should we make videos on the new 52 Swamp Thing? Because I've been thinking about doing that because DC's releases, you know, their releases are kind of a little hit and miss for me right now. And I kind of felt like, you know, keeping that DC content going by just covering like older stories that we never did, right? Like New 52 Swamp Thing or New 52 something else or something like that. Let me know if you guys want to see that because we never covered that and I thought it'd be kind of cool. But nonetheless, Swamp Thing basically comes to the realization that they don't really have to break in guns blazing because if they did, it would be a suicide mission. I mean, remember, every one of these Batmen has in some form or fashion taken out the Justice League on their own world. And so taking out these guys, it would not be hard at all. It'd be the easiest thing, right? So that's one of the biggest issues that they have. And so in response to that, Swamp Thing says, well, I can tap into what's left of the green. He's like, I can do what I must. And so once he goes into the green of the world, he in turn beseeches it. And he says, look, I know there's not a whole lot of you left, and I'm sorry for what it is that I must do. But the green are actually receptive to it. And the green's response is basically like, we're really all that's left on this world. And if what little life that we have left can be done for the purpose of saving this world and saving the multiverse itself, all the other aspects of the green spread throughout all existence that could easily fall, then do what you need to do because you're doing it in the name of the greater good. The Parliament of Trees is fully on board with this. Now, it does not make Swamp Thing, you know, godly powerful, right? It does not elevate him to like a ridiculous level of power. But what it does do is it gives him the ability to give them access under Castle Bat, right? To start opening passageways so they can get to where they need to go. And because he is essentially one with the planet now, he knows all the little nooks and crannies, all the little caves, all the little tunnels, all that kind of stuff. So what he lacks in power, he makes up for in knowledge, which is, I would argue in this particular instance, far more important. And so because of that, Jarro begins to kind of tap into what's going on out there, basically begins to look beyond where he is right now. And for the most part, it's kind of Snyder just giving us an update and saying that like the classic Wally West, red-haired Wally West, and then the new 52 Wally West, Barry Allen and Jay Garrick are all still running, right? Like they're all still running, trying to outrun the Batman Who Laughs. The issue with this is despite the fact that they're speedsters and despite the fact that they have a huge amount of energy, they can't run forever. And I would argue Wally West will be able to run longer than anybody else. One, because he mainlines the Speed Force, right? So he basically has it just pumping directly into his veins. And two, the power that he does have is amplified by the power of Dr. Manhattan. The other speedsters can stay there to keep him protected, but at the end of the day, it really is just going to kind of come down to Wally, right? And so because of that, the big concern is that if the Batman Who Laughs catches up to Wally West and manages to overpower and kill Wally West, and it seems like he probably could, then he would basically absorb what's left of Dr. Manhattan's powers inside Wally, and then following that, take over everything. He would kill Perpetua and then seize control of the multiverse and then recreate everything in his own image. Another thing that kind of goes on here is a bit of a conversation between Jonah Hex and Harley Quinn. Now, the idea between this conversation, involving these two characters is really one where they almost kind of see this as like a Suicide Squad sort of mission, in the sense that it's like, hey, like we're basically cannon fodder. We were brought here for the purpose of the fact that, if it comes down to it, we're expendable, right? Like we're lives that can just kind of be tossed away. And the reality is that that's true, right? Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman, well, Batman probably would, but the other two wouldn't really say it in so many words, right? They wouldn't really say, we brought you here just so we could throw your lives away if we need to, but that's kind of how it is. That's the reason why, like, the other major heavy hitters were thrown out there, right? We're basically left out and to go on their own respective missions because they can actually pull those missions off. And so having Jonah Hex here and having Harley Quinn here is kind of like, if things go south, it's been good knowing you. That's kind of how it is. It sucks. But nonetheless, from there, you basically have this massive wall that kind of stands in their way. And then, of course, the task comes to Superman to use his X-ray vision and to see what's on the other side. The problem is that as soon as he does, the wall immediately gets obliterated and you start seeing these crazy versions of Batman, right? Like you get Black Monday, which is basically like Batman with the power of Solomon Grundy, right? You get Cole, who kind of looks like Mira in Batman, which is kind of weird. Cropter, which is an interesting name. You get Ark, which is like Batman and Scarecrow. And it's kind of cool because we actually get these sort of ad hoc explanations here. The first bit of an explanation that we get is in the form of Ark. And this guy basically says that he has all of Arkham Asylum living inside his body, right? And so what seems to have happened is that in this dark multiverse world, that Batman had basically taken all of, the Arkham inmates, right? So Joker, Riddler, Scarecrow, probably Two-Face, Mr. Freeze, had taken all these different characters and then just more or less Frankensteined himself, right? So, using the DNA of Killer Croc, that's probably why he looks the way he does. He's got the cards of the Joker. He's got like the hat and the kind of, he's got the hat of Scarecrow. He's got like the body of Clayface. If I'm being honest with you guys, I'd say that this could potentially be the deadliest version of Batman. Literally, he throws one of his cards at Harley. She catches it and it's a card made of clay. And it's one of these things where it could potentially have taken over her. Of course, she throws it back. But nonetheless, it's a cool little thing here. From there, you go into the Pearl, and the Pearl is not actually Batman. Instead, the Pearl is Batman's mom. And so in that dark multiverse universe, it looked like Bruce Wayne as a kid was killed alongside Thomas Wayne, and she survived. The other one that you get is Cole. And Cole is actually the daughter of Wonder Woman and Batman. And it's like, I kind of want to see that universe too, man. Like, you guys get what I'm saying? Like you have Superman who faces off against like Solomon Grundy Batman, basically, and manages to overpower him, to a degree. But the issue with this is that as they fight, it's one of these things where the fight just kind of keeps going, right? These guys are designed to essentially match Batman and match Wonder Woman and Superman. And so in response to that, Jarro ends up using his powers and basically overpowering their minds, right? Not only that, also forcing a way open, like forcing a way for them to essentially escape all these different foes. So once they actually get away, they get into this massive dark space, right? This massive, like this hugely empty dark space. And it's kind of like, okay, like no one really knows what's going on here. But then suddenly, with Superman having previously been affected with anti-life, I don't know if you guys recall that in the early stories when he was being held by Darkseid, that ultimately this leads to him being an almost kind of anti-life version of himself detector, right? In the sense that he can detect people like him. But more than that, he can detect a super powerful godlike beast that's near them. And this leads to Batman popping a flare, only for us to find out that it's Barbados, that the Batman who laughs has captured Barbados. And I guess it makes sense. It's crazy. It's a ridiculous reveal, right? That like Barbados is being held in the basement of Castle Bat by the Batman who laughs. And it's kind of nuts because Batman's response is like, all this is your fault, right? Like you brought that laughing thing from that dark multiverse, from that dark world into the rest of the multiverse. And then like Barbados creates this amazing argument. And he's like, no, that's not really true. I mean, I guess it kind of is, but let me ask you this. Like before I rose up and brought him here, my role was that of the forger of worlds. I basically took all these worlds that were made of nightmares and I destroyed them all. Only the worlds that were made of dreams were the ones that were allowed to continue, basically like not the crappy worlds. But while he ended up basically defecting along his path, he said like in the last years, I watched my realm fill with nightmare planets, with more nightmare planets than ever, world upon world of anger and selfishness and fear and hate. And all I did was bring my realm here for you to see. So who's the bigger cause of all this? The person who brought these dark worlds up to your multiverse, or you guys, the ones who created them in the first place? Now from there, you basically end up picking up with the Robin King, right? This was a version of Bruce Wayne who didn't really grow up to become Batman. Then in the immediate aftermath of his parents dying, he basically started concocting plans to like conquer crime, more or less. So basically like using a kid's imagination to become the darkest version of himself that he could imagine. And one of the things that happens here is, of course, he kind of shows up. Now, the Robin King is also a bit of an enigma. We know he comes from the dark multiverse. He's an evil version of Bruce Wayne, but we've kind of seen instances over the course of the story so far where he almost kind of has helped the the heroes out a little bit. And so it's kind of like, okay, like, is he a true, like a full-on villain? Well, this question kind of gets answered in the sense that he basically ends up taking on like Swamp Thing, Jonah Hex, and Harley Quinn. And it's one of these things where he kind of explains a bit of his history, right? And saying that, like, for him, when he has his utility belt is a kid's imagination utility belt, in the sense that he can use it for any number of things. Like when he goes and faces off against Swamp Thing, what he contains inside his utility belt is the Rock, right? The one thing that can basically take out Swamp Thing, right? Like his mortal enemy, the mortal enemy of the Green. And so he literally takes it and throws it at Swamp Thing, right? And using that begins to kind of decay the Green, which in turn starts to decay Swamp Thing. From there, for Harley Quinn in his universe tracked him down pretty fast. Like she figured out what he was doing pretty quickly. She came running up on him with a mallet. He ended up beating her to death with it. And then with Jonah Hex, what he ends up doing is firing a gun that, while Jonah Hex is already dead, technically speaking, the bullet that's fired is designed to break down necrotic tissue. So literally dissolve Jonah Hex, which is exactly what happens. And so Jonah Hex really kind of falls. From there, it leads to Swamp Thing grabbing Jarro and Harley and getting out of there. The issue with this is that Jarro was the means by which Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman were going to be yanked out of those particular universes and brought back to Castle Bat so they could make their escape. But the further away Jarro is, the more difficult it'll be for him to be their psychic anchor, and potentially they could just be stuck out in those universes forever. They could be stuck in those respective worlds. And so with each one, with Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman seizing their own box, what it does is it teleports them to their own particular realm. The first one is the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, what Wonder Woman's been saying here the entire time, and what Snyder had been telling us, is that because of what was going on, in the sense of these are the crisis events that are perpetually happening, meaning they're constantly happening, that when they arrive here, the idea is that they're going to show up what is in effect in the middle of the crisis, right? So it would be like, it's kind of like Avengers Endgame, where like they were using the time stone and they were just showing up when things were happening. So like during the original Avengers movie, the Incredible Hulk showed up in the middle of the Chitauri invasion. That was kind of the expectation here. And they could basically turn the tide of the conflict to their success and actually end the crisis on that world. Because if the crisis is constantly happening, and these worlds exist because the Batman Who Laughs made them to ensure that crisis energy perpetually exists, so that Perpetua can absorb that crisis energy and keep herself powerful, then it stands to reason the best way to cut her off from that energy source is to end the crises on these worlds. And so with that being the case, the first location we get is the Crisis on Infinite Earths. But instead of showing up in the midst of a massive conflict, we basically show up in a giant white space, right? And this, by all standards of measurement, looks like the antimatter universe. It looks like the Anti-Monitor 1. And we're kind of given this look, this little kid version of the Anti-Monitor, right? That almost kind of seems to be just living existence completely and totally, like in its entirety. It's kind of weird. But from there, you jump to the final crisis, and then you basically end up having Superman arriving here, where he's attacked by Superman, as well as Darkseid, who's kind of standing over everything. And Superman's like, no, this is not how it's supposed to be. This is not how the final crisis happened. Like, we defeated Darkseid. Like, we basically won. And Darkseid's like, no, this is exactly how everything should be, right? And then from there, you get into the Infinite Crisis. And as soon as Wonder Woman shows up, she's immediately attacked. And it's kind of like, what in the world is going on here? And that's when she basically looks up, and she's kind of like, I don't understand, right? Like, this is not right. I don't remember this moment happening in the Infinite Crisis. And the response to this person here is like, that's because it didn't happen. In these various crisis events, in the dark multiverse version of Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Anti-Monitor won. The Anti-Monitor defeated all the superheroes and recreated reality, right? He destroyed the Spectre, and he destroyed everything and recreated the whole multiverse in his own image, wiped out all existence, and there was just the antimatter universe left. And during the events of Infinite Crisis, Superboy Prime overpowered all the Supermen. He was never defeated. And during the events of Final Crisis, Darkseid's anti-life equation took hold. He conquered the world and all the superheroes in it. And that's exactly what Dark Multiverse Superboy Prime says when he looks onto Diana Prince. When he looks onto Wonder Woman, he says, I am Superboy Prime. And on these crisis worlds, Wonder Woman, all of you lost. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. I will catch you all later. Peace.